They sent Miriam Barlow deep into the mountains because they believed a woman like her could disappear there without anyone caring. She was a widow, poor, soft-bodied, and large enough that her husband's family had spent years reminding her she took up too much space. They told her the lonely mountain man waiting at the end of the road had buried one wife already. They told her people in town crossed the street when they saw him coming. And as Miriam sat inside the rattling wagon, with tears drying silently on her round cheeks, she began to understand what her late husband's family had really done. They had not found her employment. They had sent her somewhere they hoped she would never return from. But 3 months later, when those same people stood before an entire church and laughed at Miriam's body, expecting the frightened widow to lower her head the way she always had, the most feared man in the valley rose from his seat. Miriam stopped him with one trembling hand. This time, she did not need anyone to speak for her. Miriam Barlow had learned long ago that cruelty rarely announced itself with shouting. Sometimes it came as a smile across a dinner table. Sometimes it was a plate served to everyone except her until the food had gone cold. Sometimes it was a dress held against her body while another woman laughed and said there would never be enough fabric in the county. And sometimes cruelty sounded almost polite. "You understand, Miriam," Ruth Barlow said, folding her thin hands on the table. "We simply cannot keep supporting another grown woman." Miriam stood beside the kitchen stove, with her husband's old apron tied around her waist. It had been 18 days since Thomas Barlow was buried. 18 days since the fever had taken him so quickly that Miriam had hardly understood she was becoming a widow until she found herself standing beside a fresh grave with wet earth on the toes of her black shoes. She had been married to Thomas for 6 years, 6 years of cooking for his mother, 6 years of washing Everett's shirts when he returned from the mill covered in dust, 6 years of helping Lydia mend dresses, preserve vegetables, clean floors, nurse sick relatives, feed hired hands, and keep the Barlow house running from before sunrise until long after everyone else went to bed. She had never been paid. That had not mattered while Thomas lived. At least she had believed she belonged somewhere. Now Ruth Barlow looked at her as though Miriam were a piece of furniture Thomas had forgotten to dispose of before dying. "I wasn't asking you to support me," Miriam said quietly. "Thomas told me there would be a little money." Everett Barlow looked up from the newspaper. Thomas's older brother was a broad man who had inherited their father's dark eyes but none of his gentleness. "What money?" Miriam swallowed. "The money Thomas put aside." Lydia Barlow gave a little laugh from near the window. Miriam looked at her. Lydia was Thomas's younger sister, unmarried at 24, pretty in a narrow, polished way that Miriam had once envied. "You believed him?" Lydia asked. Miriam's cheeks warmed. "He was my husband. That does not make him good with money. He said there was enough for me to rent a small room in town until I found work." Everett lowered the newspaper. "There is no room in town you can afford." "I could work." "At what?" Miriam remained silent. Everett leaned back in his chair. "That is the trouble, Miriam. You have lived here so long you think stirring stew and folding linens makes you useful in the real world." Miriam felt something painful tighten behind her ribs. "I worked every day in this house." Ruth sighed impatiently. "Please don't turn this into one of your emotional scenes." Miriam blinked. She had not raised her voice. She had not cried. Not yet. Lydia looked her over slowly. Miriam knew that look. She had known it since the day Thomas brought her home as his bride. Miriam had been a large girl and had become a large woman. At 31, she had a full, soft body, heavy arms, broad hips, a thick waist, and a chest that made most dresses fit badly unless she altered them herself. Her face was round, with dark eyes and gentle features that might have been called pretty if people could look past the rest of her. Her dark wavy hair reached nearly to her waist when she let it down, though Ruth insisted a respectable married woman should keep it pinned. Even after Thomas died, Miriam continued pinning it. Habit was difficult to bury. Lydia tilted her head. "You might find kitchen work somewhere," she said, "though carrying trays up and down stairs all day could be difficult for someone of your size." Everett laughed into his coffee. Miriam lowered her eyes. She hated herself for doing it. She hated that the movement came so naturally. Thomas had never spoken to her that way. He had not been a passionate husband. Their marriage had been quiet, practical, and sometimes lonely. But when Miriam complained about someone mocking her weight, Thomas would touch her hand and say, "Don't listen." She used to wish he would say more. Now she would have given almost anything to hear those two words again. "What happened to the money?" Miriam asked. Everett's face hardened. "There were debts." "What debts?" "Family matters. But Thomas told me, Thomas is dead." The words struck the room like a door slamming. Miriam stared at him. Everett immediately looked uncomfortable, though not sorry. Ruth stood. "That is enough. We have found a solution for you." Miriam's fingers tightened around the apron. "What solution?" "A position." She looked from Ruth to Everett. Lydia smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Where?" "North," Everett said. "How far north?" "Several hours beyond Bracken Hollow." Miriam had heard of Bracken Hollow. Everyone had. It was a small settlement pressed against the mountains, surrounded by timberland, old mining trails, and country so steep people disappeared during winter storms and were sometimes not found until spring. "What kind of position?" "Housekeeping." "For whom?" There was a brief silence. Everett folded the newspaper. "Daniel Arlen." Miriam felt the blood drain from her face. Even Lydia noticed. "Oh," Lydia said softly. "So you have heard of him." Miriam had heard of Daniel Arlen. Stories traveled faster than wagons. He lived alone somewhere above Bracken Hollow, in a dark house near Alder Ridge. Some said he had once been wealthy. Others said he had been a trapper, a timberman, or a guide for mining companies. The stories changed, depending on who was telling them. But every version included the same thing. His wife had died. Some claimed she fell from a ridge during a storm. Some said she had been running from him. A traveling salesman had once told Miriam that Daniel Arlen had carried his wife's body down the mountain himself and had not spoken to another person for weeks. Another rumor said there was a room in his house that had remained locked since the day she died. Miriam looked at Everett. "You want me to live in his house? You said you wanted work." "I said I wanted the money Thomas left me." Everett stood. For the first time since Thomas's funeral, Miriam looked directly at him. Something passed through his face. Not guilt. Annoyance. "You should be grateful. Did Mr. Arlen ask for me?" "He asked at the trading post whether anyone knew a woman capable of keeping a house." "A woman?" "Yes. Or me." Everett's jaw shifted. Miriam understood. "He doesn't know you're sending me. He knows someone is coming." Ruth moved closer. "You cannot stay here, Miriam." There it was. The truth underneath everything. Not concern. Not employment. Not opportunity. She was being removed. Miriam looked around the kitchen she had cleaned almost every morning for 6 years. The curtains she had sewn were hanging over the windows. The bread cooling beside the stove had been kneaded by her hands. 3 jars of peach preserve sat on the shelf, each labeled in her handwriting. Her entire married life seemed to be staring back at her. "You want me gone?" Ruth's expression softened, and somehow that hurt even more. "You must begin accepting reality." "What reality?" "That Thomas is no longer here to protect you." Miriam's eyes burned. Lydia stood from the table. "No one is saying this to be cruel." Miriam almost laughed. She could not. Her throat had closed. Lydia continued. "You are 31. You have no children, no property, no independent income. And Miriam..." She hesitated. Miriam wished she had not. That hesitation told her exactly where the sentence was going. "You are not exactly in a position to remarry easily." Everett looked away. Ruth said nothing. Lydia gave Miriam a sympathetic smile that made the humiliation unbearable. "There are women who can survive by finding another husband. You know that is unlikely for you." "Because I am fat." Lydia's eyebrows rose. "I did not say that. You did not have to." Miriam untied the apron. Her hands shook so badly she needed 3 attempts. She placed it on the table. Ruth sighed. "Miriam, when do I leave?" The wagon came the next morning. Nobody hugged her goodbye. Ruth packed bread, 2 apples, and a small wedge of cheese into cloth for the journey. Everett carried Miriam's trunk outside. Lydia stood in the doorway, wearing one of Miriam's old shawls. Miriam noticed, but said nothing. The shawl had belonged to Thomas's grandmother. Miriam had assumed it was hers now. Apparently not. She climbed into the wagon beside an elderly driver named Mr. Clegg. As they rolled away, Miriam looked back once. No one waved. She kept looking until the Barlow house disappeared behind the trees. Then she turned toward the road. The tears came quietly. Miriam covered her mouth so Mr. Clegg would not hear her. She cried for Thomas. She cried for 6 lost years. She cried because her entire life could apparently be packed into one trunk. Mostly, she cried because Lydia's words had found the weakest place inside her. No respectable man would want a woman your size. The thought followed her mile after mile. By afternoon, the gentle hills became steeper. By evening, mountains filled the horizon. Miriam had never seen anything so large. They frightened her and comforted her at the same time. For once, there was something in the world that took up more space than she did, and no one seemed offended by it. Mr. Clegg glanced toward her. "You ever met Arlen?" "No. He doesn't talk much, so I've heard. Folks talk plenty for him." Miriam looked at the driver. "What do you think happened to his wife?" Mr. Clegg kept his eyes on the road. "I think a woman died on a mountain. That's all? That's enough tragedy without inventing extra." Miriam considered that. After a while, he added, "Daniel Arlen scares people because he doesn't explain himself. Folks don't like empty spaces. They fill them with stories." The sun was nearly gone when the wagon finally climbed the last road. Miriam saw the house between tall pines. It was larger than she expected. Not a mansion, not a cabin. A wide 2-story home built of dark timber and gray stone, with a deep porch and a chimney releasing a thin line of smoke into the evening sky. No light showed from most of the windows. A man was standing beside the porch. Miriam's stomach tightened. Daniel Arlen was taller than Everett, with broad shoulders and dark hair that needed cutting. He wore a faded work shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows and heavy trousers marked with sawdust. His face was lean and serious. He did not look like a monster. That almost frightened her more. The wagon stopped. Daniel approached. Mr. Clegg climbed down. "Brought your housekeeper." Daniel looked at Miriam. His expression changed, only slightly. Miriam knew that change too. Surprise. Her body stiffened. She waited for the next part. The long stare, the hidden smile, the joke. Daniel simply removed his hat. "Mrs. Barlow, yes. I'm Daniel Arlen." She climbed down carefully. The long ride had stiffened her knees. When her boot touched the ground, she nearly stumbled. Daniel reached out instinctively, then stopped before touching her. "You all right?" "Yes." He looked toward her trunk. "This everything?" Miriam nodded. Daniel lifted the trunk as though it weighed almost nothing. Mr. Clegg climbed back onto the wagon. "You paying me now or next trip?" Daniel tossed him a coin. Mr. Clegg caught it. Then he looked at Miriam. "Remember what I said?" Miriam nodded. The wagon turned. She watched it disappear. The sound of the wheels faded. Suddenly, Miriam understood how alone she was. Nothing stood between her and miles of forest, except a stranger whose wife had died under mysterious circumstances. Daniel carried her trunk toward the porch. Miriam remained where she was. He glanced back. "Mrs. Barlow?" She forced herself to move. Inside, the house smelled of cedar, wood smoke, and something cooking. Daniel placed her trunk near the stairs. "You eaten?" "A little." "That means no." He walked toward the kitchen. Miriam followed cautiously. A pot of stew simmered over the stove. Daniel took down 2 bowls. "You cook?" "Yes." "Good. I'm terrible at it." That was the first almost humorous thing he said. Miriam sat slowly. Daniel filled her bowl. She stared at the stew. There was beef in it. Real beef. Potatoes. Carrots. She could not remember the last time anyone had filled a bowl for her. Daniel sat across from her. Miriam took one careful bite, then another. She realized she was eating too quickly and forced herself to slow down. Daniel pretended not to notice. That kindness almost made her cry again. When she finished, he spoke. "I should explain the work." Miriam straightened. "The house needs cleaning, laundry, cooking when I'm here. I'm gone some days cutting timber or checking traps. I don't expect you to work from sunrise until midnight." Miriam stared at him. "What? You look surprised." "I am." Daniel frowned slightly. "What were you told?" "That you needed someone to keep the house." "I do. For room and board." Daniel stopped. "Who told you that?" "My husband's family." His face hardened. "I told Everett Barlow I would pay $22 a month, plus food and a room." Miriam's breath caught. $22. She had never possessed $22 of her own. "He didn't tell me." Daniel leaned back. "What did he tell you?" "That I should be grateful you would let me stay here." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he looked toward the window. "That explains a few things." "What things?" He asked whether wages could be sent through him. Miriam felt cold. "And?" "I said no." She lowered her gaze. Daniel's voice became quieter. "Mrs. Barlow, your wages belong to you." Miriam's eyes stung. She hated how easily she cried now. Daniel seemed to notice. He looked uncomfortable, not disgusted, simply uncertain about what to do with a crying woman. Miriam quickly wiped her cheek. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For being foolish." "You haven't done anything foolish." "You don't know me." "No." He stood. "But I know if you work in this house, you'll be paid. I know you'll eat at this table, and I know nobody here is going to make jokes about your body." Miriam froze. Daniel glanced toward her. "They told me enough." Heat rushed into her face. "What did Everett tell you?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "That you were slow, difficult, that I shouldn't expect much physical work from you." Miriam stared at the table. "He said more, didn't he?" Daniel did not answer. That was answer enough. Miriam pushed back her chair. "I should see my room." Daniel did not stop her. He carried her trunk upstairs. At the end of the hall were 4 doors. Daniel opened the second. A clean room waited inside. There was a wide bed, a wooden dresser, a washstand, a window overlooking the valley, and a faded blue quilt. Miriam stepped inside. "It's beautiful. It's ordinary." "Not to me." Daniel placed the trunk beside the bed. "There's one thing." Miriam turned. He pointed toward the last door at the end of the hall. "Dark wood, heavy lock. That room stays closed." Miriam's heartbeat changed. "Why?" Daniel's face went still. "Because I said so." The gentleness disappeared from his voice. Not replaced by anger. Something deeper. Pain, perhaps. Miriam nodded. "All right." Daniel looked like he wanted to say something else. Instead, he left. Miriam closed her door. For several minutes, she stood in the middle of the room listening to the house. Wind moved through the trees outside. The floor creaked. Somewhere downstairs, Daniel added wood to the stove. Miriam sat on the edge of the bed. She should have been terrified. Instead, she touched the quilt and began to cry. Because for the first time since Thomas died, there was a door she could close that belonged only to her. The first week passed quietly. Miriam woke before sunrise out of habit. On her second morning, Daniel found her scrubbing the kitchen floor while the sky was still dark. He stood in the doorway holding a lantern. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning." "At 4 in the morning?" "I always begin early." "You don't have to." Miriam kept scrubbing. "If I sleep late, you'll think I'm lazy." Daniel leaned against the doorframe. "No, I'll think you're sleeping." Miriam looked up. He was serious. She almost smiled. By the end of the week, the house had changed. Curtains were washed. Dust disappeared from shelves. Miriam found dried herbs in the pantry and began using them. She baked biscuits. She repaired a torn cushion. She moved a small table closer to the window because she noticed Daniel always stood there when he drank his morning coffee. Daniel noticed everything. He simply did not say much about it. One evening he returned carrying a sack of flour. "You bought flour?" "We were low. I could have made the old sack last another week." "I don't need it to last another week." Daniel set it on the counter. Miriam looked at him. The sentence was ordinary. yet she understood how different their lives had been. For Miriam, everything had always needed to last another week. Soap, flour, candles, her shoes, her patience, her hope. Daniel seemed to live as though there would be more. That idea alone felt like wealth. He also worked differently than the Barlows. When Miriam carried water, Daniel carried water. When snow from an early mountain storm broke a branch near the woodshed, Daniel did not call her from the kitchen and tell her to drag it away. He removed it himself. When Miriam struggled to move a heavy washtub, he lifted the opposite end without comment. She was not accustomed to cooperation. It made her suspicious. It also made her watch him. Daniel was gentler than the stories suggested. He left scraps for a fox that appeared near the trees. He repaired a birdhouse beside the barn. Once, Miriam saw him walk half a mile in the rain because a neighbor's mule had broken through a fence. But whenever someone from town visited, Daniel became quiet and hard. People responded to him the same way. A merchant named Mr. Vale came with supplies and barely stepped through the doorway. "Afternoon, Arlen." "Vale." The merchant looked at Miriam. His surprise was obvious. "So this is the woman Everett sent." Miriam stiffened. Daniel noticed. "She has a name." Mr. Vale cleared his throat. "Of course." Miriam continued folding linen. The merchant left quickly. That evening she asked, "Why is everyone afraid of you?" Daniel was sharpening a knife at the table. He stopped. "They aren't. They are," he resumed. "People fear what makes a better story." Miriam thought of Mr. Clegg. "Your wife?" Daniel's hand stopped again. This time he did not continue. Miriam immediately regretted asking. "I'm sorry." "No." His voice was low. "You'll hear it eventually." She waited. Daniel looked toward the stove. "Elise died 4 years ago." Miriam said nothing. "We argued that morning." His jaw tightened. "She wanted to leave the mountain before winter. I wanted 1 more month to finish a timber contract." Wind pressed lightly against the windows. Daniel continued. "She saddled a horse, took the ridge trail toward Bracken Hollow." Miriam barely breathed. A storm came in. His eyes remained fixed on the fire. The horse returned without her. Miriam felt a chill. "I found her below the North Ridge." Daniel's voice weakened for the first time since she had met him. She had fallen. Miriam looked down. "I'm sorry. People heard we argued and decided you had something to do with it." Daniel nodded. "Some did." "Did the sheriff investigate?" "Yes." "And?" "Accident." "Then why do people still talk?" Daniel gave a tired smile with no humor. "Because an accident is boring." Miriam looked at him. She understood that better than he knew. A fat widow abandoned by her family was sad. A desperate fat widow chasing a dangerous man for money would be entertaining. People preferred stories that allowed them to feel superior. That night, Miriam lay awake. The locked room was directly across the hall. She did not touch it. She did not need to. She already knew who had lived behind that door. Elise. For several days after that conversation, Daniel spoke even less. Miriam allowed him the silence. She began noticing small things. There was one chipped cup Daniel never used. A pale yellow shawl hung inside the mudroom. An old pressed flower lay inside a book. A house could mourn someone. Miriam had never understood that before. Then the strangers appeared. She noticed the first man near the tree line while hanging laundry. He stood partly hidden behind a pine, too far away to identify. Miriam stared. The figure disappeared. She told herself it was a hunter. 2 days later, she saw another rider on the ridge. He did not approach the house. He simply watched. When Daniel returned, Miriam mentioned it. His face changed immediately. "Where?" "Near the east trees." "Did he speak to you?" "No." Daniel walked outside. Miriam followed to the porch. He studied the ridge. "Stay close to the house tomorrow." Fear moved softly through her stomach. "Why?" "I don't know who it is." "That is not comforting." Daniel glanced at her. "I'm not trying to frighten you. You're succeeding by accident." He almost smiled. The next morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Miriam. The handwriting belonged to Ruth Barlow. Miriam stood on the porch holding it. Daniel had gone to check timber farther up the ridge. She opened the envelope. Dear Miriam, we hope you have settled into your new position. Everett has heard concerning things about Mr. Arlen and feels responsible for your safety. Please write and tell us whether you are comfortable in that house. Has he treated you properly? Does he ever become angry? Are you permitted to leave the property? We only wish to know you are well. Miriam read it twice, then a third time. Something about the letter felt wrong. Ruth had not asked whether Miriam was comfortable when sending her there. She had not cared whether Daniel was dangerous. Now suddenly the family was concerned. Miriam folded the letter. That afternoon she wrote 3 sentences. I am well. Mr. Arlen pays me fairly. I am treated with respect. She stared at the words, then added one more. I am more comfortable here than I was in your house. She sealed it. For the first time in days, she smiled. The smile did not last. The following Sunday, Daniel offered to take her into Bracken Hollow. Miriam needed cloth, thread, and a new pair of work gloves. The settlement was larger than she expected. There was a church, mercantile, blacksmith, small hotel, bakery, and several houses scattered along the road. People noticed them immediately. Daniel climbed down from the wagon. Then he turned and offered Miriam his hand. She hesitated. A group of women stood near the mercantile. One whispered something. Another laughed. Miriam almost refused Daniel's hand. Then she became angry with herself. She took it. Daniel helped her down. Inside the store, Miriam examined fabric. A woman beside her glanced at Daniel, then at Miriam. You're the new housekeeper. Miriam looked over. Yes. The woman was perhaps 40, with grey beginning at her temples and flower on one sleeve. I'm Naomi Reeve. Miriam Barlow. I know. That made Miriam uneasy. Naomi noticed. Small town. Miriam nodded. Naomi selected a spool of thread, then quietly said, Don't believe everything people tell you. About Daniel. Naomi's eyes moved toward the front of the store where Daniel was speaking to the clerk. About anyone. Before Miriam could ask what she meant, another woman entered. She looked Miriam up and down. So it's true. Miriam recognized the voice before she remembered the face. Mrs. Pierce. She had visited Ruth Barlow several times. What is true? That you moved in with him. I work for Mr. Arlen. Mrs. Pierce's smile widened. Of course. Miriam's cheeks warmed. Naomi's face became cold. Mrs. Pierce continued. Your family has been worried sick. Miriam stared. My family sent me here. Yes. Because you insisted. I did not. Mrs. Pierce blinked innocently. That's not what I heard. Miriam's stomach tightened. What did you hear? That you refused every reasonable arrangement after Thomas died because you thought you deserved more money. Everett said you became difficult. Daniel had heard enough. He appeared beside Miriam. Mrs. Pierce. The woman stiffened. Daniel's voice was quiet. You need something from this store? She looked offended. I am shopping. Then shop. She left without another word. Miriam stood motionless. Daniel looked at her. Don't. Don't what? Believe her. Miriam swallowed. My family told people I refused help. Apparently. Why? Daniel did not answer. Naomi Reeve did. Because it sounds better than saying they threw a widow out before the dirt settled on her husband's grave. Miriam turned. Naomi's expression was unreadable. You know something? Naomi looked toward the door. Not enough yet. Enough for what? But Naomi would say no more. On the ride home, Miriam barely spoke. When they reached the house, Daniel began unloading supplies. Miriam remained beside the wagon. Daniel. It was the first time she had used his given name. He looked at her. My family asked if I was comfortable. I know. How? Everett wrote me too. Miriam felt cold. What did he say? Daniel hesitated. Tell me. He wanted to know whether you were causing trouble. Miriam stared. Daniel continued carefully. He said you could become attached to people too quickly. What does that mean? He implied you might misunderstand kindness. The humiliation arrived so suddenly Miriam could barely breathe. She turned away. Daniel set down the sack he was carrying. Miriam, they think I'll chase you. He's trying to control the story, because no man could actually want me. Daniel's expression hardened. Miriam laughed once. bitterly. "That is what Lydia said before I left. She said women survive widowhood by remarrying, but that was not likely for someone like me." Daniel was silent. Miriam wiped her face angrily. "I hate crying." "Why?" "Because everyone thinks it proves they won." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "No," his voice softened. "Sometimes crying proves they hurt you." Miriam turned toward him. "There's a difference." She stared at him. Then Daniel picked up the sack again and walked toward the house. Miriam followed slowly. That night, she heard a sound in the hallway, a key turning. Her door opened slightly. She looked out. Daniel stood before the locked room. For several seconds he did not move. Then he opened it. Miriam could see only darkness inside. Daniel disappeared through the doorway. The door closed behind him. Miriam returned to bed. But curiosity had awakened. And this time, it was not Daniel she feared. It was the growing sense that someone far away was carefully arranging the pieces of her life. Winter began reaching down from the higher mountains in thin white streaks. Each morning, the peaks looked slightly brighter. Daniel said they still had weeks before serious snow. Miriam began preserving food. She filled shelves with apples, dried beans, pickled vegetables, and jars of berry jam. Daniel built another rack in the pantry, because she ran out of space. "You preparing for an army? I prepare for winter. There are 2 of us." Miriam looked at the shelves. "I've known households of 8 with less." Daniel leaned against the doorway. And did they survive? They complained. "That wasn't my question." Miriam smiled. "Yes, they survived. Then keep going." Their life settled into something almost peaceful. Daniel began returning earlier from work. Miriam noticed but did not mention it. Sometimes they ate dinner without speaking. Sometimes they spoke for an hour. He told her about the mountain. She told him about Thomas. Neither pretended the dead had never existed. That mattered. One evening, Miriam repaired Daniel's coat beside the fire. "He sounds like he was kind," Daniel said. "Thomas?" "Yes," Miriam considered. "He was kind in private." Daniel looked at her. "What does that mean?" "He never mocked me. That should be expected." It wasn't. Daniel's jaw tightened. Miriam continued sewing. "When his family made jokes, Thomas told me later not to listen." "Later?" "He didn't like conflict." Daniel stared into the fire. "So he let them humiliate you and comforted you afterward." The sentence hurt because it was true. Miriam looked down. "He loved me in the way he knew how." Daniel did not argue. After a moment he said, "Sometimes the way we know how isn't enough." Miriam thought about that for several days. She also thought about Daniel's wife. The locked room remained closed. Then one afternoon the key was left in the door. Miriam noticed while carrying folded towels upstairs. She stopped. The door was slightly open. She could have walked past. She tried. Then she heard something fall inside. Miriam turned. "Daniel?" No answer. He was miles away. She pushed the door open. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Sunlight passed through pale curtains. Miriam stood frozen. Nothing inside was frightening. That made the secrecy feel sadder. A woman's dresses hung neatly beside the wall. Books lined a shelf. A pair of riding boots sat beneath a chair. There were photographs. One showed a younger Daniel, smiling beside a slender woman with light hair. Elise. Miriam had never seen Daniel smile that way. She felt like an intruder. She turned to leave. Then she saw the papers scattered on the floor. The wind from the partially open window had knocked them from a table. Miriam bent to collect them. Most were official documents. A sheriff's statement, a doctor's report, a map of the North Ridge. Miriam tried not to read. Then one line caught her attention. No evidence of struggle. Another. Weather conditions severe. Another. Witness reports indicate Mrs. Arlen departed alone at approximately 3 in the afternoon following an argument with her husband. Miriam slowly placed the papers back. Daniel had kept everything, not because he was hiding guilt, because he was punishing himself. A photograph lay face down near the leg of the table. Miriam picked it up. On the back, handwriting read, For Daniel. So you remember I chose these mountains too. Miriam stared at the sentence. The rumors said Elise had hated the mountain. The photograph suggested something different. She replaced it. Then she noticed another letter beneath the table. It was unfinished. Daniel, if you read this after I have left for town, do not be angry. I know we said things this morning. I know you think I want to leave you. I don't. I just want... The sentence ended. Miriam covered her mouth. Elise had never finished it. A floorboard creaked behind her. Miriam turned. Daniel stood in the doorway. His face had gone white. I'm sorry. He did not answer. The door was open. Papers fell. I only came in because I heard, "Get out!" Miriam's chest tightened. Daniel, please! The word was worse than anger. She walked past him. At the doorway, she stopped. I'm sorry. Daniel entered the room and closed the door. Miriam went downstairs. She prepared supper. Daniel did not come down. She left a plate covered near the stove. At midnight, it remained untouched. The next morning, Daniel was gone before she woke. The plate was still there. Miriam spent the day with a weight inside her chest. He returned after dark. His beard was damp with melting snow. Miriam stood when he entered. Daniel removed his coat. I shouldn't have gone inside. No, I didn't mean, you shouldn't have gone inside. Miriam swallowed. I understand. Daniel looked at her. No, you don't. Something in his voice broke. That room is the last place where she is still alive. Miriam felt tears rise. Daniel turned away. I know how foolish that sounds. It doesn't. He looked at her. Miriam took a careful breath. When Thomas died, I kept his work shirt under my pillow for 11 nights. Daniel remained still. I didn't wash it because it still smelled like him. Her voice trembled. On the 12th day, Ruth found it. She said keeping dirty clothing in bed was disgusting and threw it into the wash. Daniel's expression softened. I cried over a shirt for 3 hours. That isn't the same. It is. No. You had a room. I had a shirt. Silence filled the kitchen. Miriam looked down. I understand more than you think. Daniel sat slowly. After a while he said, I blamed myself. I know. You read the report. Yes. Elise wanted me to go with her that day. His eyes were distant. She asked me to come into town. I had work. We argued. Daniel swallowed. I told her if she was so determined to go, she could go alone. Miriam sat across from him. She did. Yes. And the storm came. Yes. Daniel. He looked at her. You did not make the storm. His face tightened. I let her leave angry. That isn't the same as killing her.
You don't understand.
I understand guilt.
No.
Miriam's voice became firmer.
My husband had chest pains 2 nights before he died.
Daniel stopped.
He said it was indigestion. I believed him. I gave him mint tea.
Her eyes filled. The fever started the next afternoon. Miriam? For months I thought if I had made him see the doctor earlier, maybe he would still be alive. Daniel said nothing. Grief is greedy, Miriam whispered. If you give it one reason to blame you, it will ask for 10 more. Daniel stared at her. Miriam wiped her eyes. I don't know what Elise would tell you if she were here, but I know Thomas would be angry if he knew I spent the rest of my life believing his death was my fault. Daniel looked toward the stairs. For the first time, the locked room seemed less frightening. Later that week, Daniel opened the door and left it open. He did not invite Miriam inside. He simply stopped locking it. That small change felt larger than any conversation, but peace did not last. The watchers returned. This time, Miriam recognized one. Everett Barlow. She saw him from the kitchen window. He was far down the slope, speaking to another man beside 2 horses. Miriam's hands became cold. She ran outside. Everett! The men looked up. Everett immediately mounted. Everett! Daniel appeared from the barn. The riders turned toward the trees. Daniel started after them. Miriam grabbed his arm. No! He looked down at her hand. She released him. That was my brother-in-law. I know. You saw him. I've seen him twice. Miriam stared. You didn't tell me. I wasn't sure. What is he doing here? Daniel looked toward the trees. I intend to find out. The answer came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Naomi Reeve arrived. She looked frightened. Daniel let her inside. Naomi removed her gloves. I need to speak with Miriam. Miriam sat at the kitchen table. Naomi remained standing. Everett has been talking. I know. No, not just talking. Miriam waited. He's telling people you came here because you were obsessed with Daniel before Thomas died. Miriam's mouth fell open. What? He says you heard Daniel had money, that you forced the family to arrange the position. That's insane. I know. Daniel's face darkened. Naomi looked at him. There's more. Miriam's stomach sank. People are saying Daniel offered you more than employment. Heat flooded Miriam's face. What are they saying? Naomi hesitated. Daniel's chair scraped. Say it. That Miriam threw herself at him. Miriam stared at the table. Naomi continued softly. They say she used sympathy, that she knew he was lonely. Miriam's eyes filled. And why would he want me? Naomi said nothing. Miriam laughed bitterly. Come on. They said that too. Naomi's expression answered. Daniel stood. Miriam immediately looked at him. Sit down. I'm going to Bracken Hollow. No. Miriam. No. They don't get to say that about you. They have said worse my entire life. That doesn't make it acceptable. I know. Daniel stared. Miriam slowly stood. But, if you ride into town angry, everyone will say I sent you. Daniel stopped. They will say I hid behind you because I could not face them. You don't owe anyone an explanation. I owe myself one. Daniel's anger faded slightly. Miriam looked at Naomi. Why is Everett doing this? Naomi lowered her eyes. That is why I came. She reached into her coat and removed several folded papers. I worked for Judge Mercer's office before I married. Thomas Barlow came to me last year because he wanted help writing a simple will. Miriam stopped breathing. What? Naomi placed the papers on the table. I witnessed it. Daniel looked between them. Miriam touched the page. Her husband's handwriting. My Thomas? Yes. Her eyes moved quickly across the document. He had left Miriam $240, his horse, a small piece of property near the Southern Creek, and his share of several timber certificates held jointly with Everett. Miriam's vision blurred. I never received any of this. I know. Naomi's voice broke. I should have spoken sooner. Miriam looked at her. Why didn't you? Everett said Thomas replaced the will. Did he? I believed him. And now? Naomi placed another paper down. There is no replacement filed. Daniel leaned forward. What does Everett gain? Naomi looked at Miriam. The timber certificates are worth more than they were last year. How much? Possibly $800. Miriam sat back. The room seemed to tilt. They had not sent her away because they could not support her. They had sent her away because she was inconvenient. Her presence meant questions. Her absence meant silence. The letters asking whether she was comfortable suddenly made sense. The men watching the house made sense. The rumors made sense. If people believe I chased Daniel for money, Miriam whispered, then if I accuse Everett of stealing from me, they'll say you are greedy, Naomi finished. Daniel cursed under his breath. Miriam stared at Thomas's signature. Tears fell onto the paper. This time she did not wipe them away. They knew. Naomi nodded. At least Everett knew. Ruth? I don't know. Lydia? I don't know. Miriam closed her eyes. The people she had served for 6 years had not simply thrown her away. They had taken what Thomas wanted her to have and built a story that would make her look shameful if she ever tried to reclaim it. Daniel reached toward her, then stopped. Miriam noticed. She placed her hand over his. Daniel's fingers closed around hers. It was the first time she had chosen his touch. Bracken Hollow had one church. By the following Sunday, nearly everyone in the settlement had heard some version of the story. Some said Miriam had stolen money from the Barlows. Some said she was accusing Everett because Daniel Arlen had promised her marriage. Some said Daniel had been lonely enough to fall for the first woman willing to live in his house. Others were crueler. Miriam heard those versions too. She heard that people laughed about Daniel needing a large woman to keep him warm through winter. She heard that someone at the mercantile had said a man who had once married beautiful Elise Arlen must have truly lost his mind. Every sentence reached Miriam eventually. Small towns had no walls strong enough to stop gossip. For 3 days she barely ate, Daniel noticed. He did not force her. He simply began leaving food nearby. A biscuit beside her sewing, a cup of warm milk near the chair, an apple sliced on a plate. Miriam ate because refusing felt like rejecting kindness. Friday evening, Daniel found her sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. Snow drifted lightly through the trees. He sat beside her. "You don't have to go Sunday." "Yes, I do. The church gathering isn't a court." "No." "Then let Naomi give the papers to the county clerk." "She will." "And let the law handle Everett." "It will." Daniel studied her. "Then why go?" Miriam watched snow gather on the railing. "Because even if I get every dollar back, they still keep the story." "What story?" "That I was unwanted." Daniel's jaw tightened. Miriam continued. "That I begged to come here. That I chased you. That I should be grateful anyone tolerated me." She looked at her hands. "I've spent my whole life letting people tell stories about me, because I thought correcting them would make me difficult." Daniel said nothing. "Do you know what I did whenever Ruth insulted me?" "What?" "I cleaned something." Daniel frowned. "I would scrub a pot, fold a sheet, bake bread. I thought if I could be useful enough, she would feel guilty." "Did she?" "No." Miriam laughed softly. "She just gave me more work." Daniel leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You don't have to earn your right to exist in a room." Miriam looked at him. "That's easy for you to say." "Why?" "Because nobody has ever looked at you and decided the amount of space your body occupies is a moral failing." Daniel's expression changed. Miriam immediately regretted the sharpness. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize." She looked away. Daniel spoke quietly. "I don't know what that feels like." "No. But I know what it feels like to enter a room and watch people decide what kind of man you are before you open your mouth." Miriam looked back. Daniel stared at the falling snow. "They think I killed Elise. Some do. They think I'm violent because I don't talk. You can be frightening." He glanced at her. Miriam smiled faintly. "You are very large. So are you." The smile disappeared. Daniel realized immediately. "Miriam." She stood. "I know you didn't mean—" "No." He rose too. "I meant we are both large people." She looked at him. Daniel seemed genuinely confused. "You think I was insulting you?" "I don't know. That's the problem." "What?" "You're so used to being hurt that sometimes you hear the blow before anyone swings." Miriam stared at him. The sentence could have sounded cruel. It did not. It sounded sad. Daniel stepped closer. "You're a beautiful woman." Miriam's breath caught. He continued before she could object. "I'm not saying that because I pity you." She looked away. "Daniel, I know you don't believe me. Please don't." "Why?" "Because if you say things like that—" Her voice failed. Daniel waited. Miriam took a shaky breath. "If you say things like that, I might begin wanting them to be true." Daniel's face softened. "They are true whether you want them or not." Miriam laughed through sudden tears. "You are a stubborn man." "So I've been told." She wiped her face. Daniel lifted one hand, then stopped. Miriam saw the question in the movement. She stepped closer. His hand touched her cheek. Warm, careful. No man had ever touched her face that way. Thomas had kissed her, held her occasionally, shared a bed with her, but this was different. Daniel looked at Miriam as though there was nothing about her he wanted to overlook. Not her round face, not the fullness beneath her chin, not her thick waist beneath the wool dress. Nothing. Miriam began crying harder. Daniel looked alarmed. "Did I?" "No." She laughed weakly. "No! Then why are you crying?" "Because I don't know what to do when someone is kind and I haven't earned it." Daniel's eyes changed. "You don't earn kindness, Miriam." He lowered his forehead against hers. For several seconds they stood beneath the porch roof, while snow whispered through the pines. Daniel did not kiss her. Miriam was grateful. She was not ready, but she did not step away either. Sunday morning arrived bright and painfully cold. Miriam dressed carefully, not to look thinner. For the first time in her life, that was not the goal. She wore a deep blue wool dress she had altered herself. It fit her body, instead of trying to hide it. The bodice rested smoothly over her full chest. The skirt fell around her broad hips without pulling. She left her long dark hair partly loose, pinned only at the sides. When she came downstairs, Daniel stood near the door. He stopped moving. Miriam immediately became self-conscious. What? Nothing. That face is not nothing. Daniel cleared his throat. You look... Miriam waited. Like yourself. She smiled. That is the strangest compliment I have ever received. It's what I meant. I know. They rode into Bracken Hollow together. The churchyard was already crowded. People turned. Miriam felt every stare. Her stomach tightened. Daniel stepped closer. Miriam whispered, "Don't." He stopped. "I need to walk in by myself." Daniel looked unhappy, but he nodded. Miriam climbed the church steps. Naomi waited near the doors. "You certain?" "No." "Good." Miriam looked at her. Naomi smiled nervously. Only foolish people are certain before something difficult. Inside, the gathering began with food, hymn singing, and announcements. Miriam could barely hear any of it. Then the Barlows arrived. Ruth entered first. Lydia followed. Everett came last. Miriam had not seen them since leaving. Her heart reacted before her mind. For one awful second, she wanted to run to Ruth. That surprised her. Some part of Miriam still remembered the woman who had brought broth when Miriam was sick. The woman who once brushed her hair after a fever. Cruelty rarely erased every good memory. That was why betrayal hurt. Ruth saw Miriam. Her face tightened. Everett whispered something. They sat near the front. After the service, people moved downstairs into the fellowship hall. Coffee was poured. Bread and pies filled long tables. Miriam remained near Daniel. Everett approached. "Miriam?" She looked at him. "Everett." He gave Daniel a cold nod. "Arlen." Daniel said nothing. Everett turned back to Miriam. "You've caused quite a disturbance." "I have. You've been accusing the family." "I haven't accused anyone publicly. Yet." People nearby had begun listening. Miriam understood. Everett had chosen the moment. He wanted the confrontation. He believed she would become emotional. He believed crying would make her look unstable. Ruth stepped closer. "Miriam, please. This has gone too far." "What has?" "These stories about Thomas's estate. They aren't stories." Everett laughed. "Here we go." Daniel shifted. Miriam touched his arm. He stopped. Everett noticed the gesture. His smile changed. "Oh." Miriam's stomach sank. "There it is." "What?" "The real reason." Everett raised his voice slightly. "You always were desperate for affection." The room became quieter. Miriam stared at him. "Everett," Ruth whispered. "Don't." But he continued. "You move into a wealthy widower's house and suddenly discover that your poor dead husband supposedly left you a fortune. It isn't a fortune. Enough to complain about." Lydia joined them. She looked Miriam over. "You certainly look comfortable." Several people shifted awkwardly. Miriam felt heat spreading up her neck. Lydia smiled. "New dress. I made it. I'm surprised you found enough cloth." A few people laughed. Not many. But Miriam heard every one. Her eyes began burning. Everett saw it. His confidence grew. "You see?" he said to the room. "This is what we dealt with for years. Everything becomes an insult." Miriam's breath shook. Ruth spoke softly. "You were always sensitive about your size." Something inside Miriam went still. Not numb, still. She looked at Ruth. "You joked about my size at dinner." Ruth blinked. "We teased." "You told Lydia not to use too much butter because I might smell it and come running." Silence. Lydia's face reddened. "That was years ago." You laughed. "Miriam, you hid cake when guests came because you said people would assume I had eaten half of it." Ruth looked around. "This is unnecessary." "No." Miriam wiped one tear. "This is exactly what is necessary." Everett scoffed. "Now she's crying." "Yes." Miriam looked directly at him. I am. The room went silent. Miriam's voice trembled. You hurt me. Everett's expression faltered. I am crying because you hurt me. I cried when Thomas died. I cried when you told me there was nothing left for me. I cried in that wagon because I believed you had sent me into the mountains to live with a dangerous stranger. Daniel's eyes dropped. Miriam continued. But crying doesn't mean you're right. Nobody moved. Miriam looked around the room. I worked in the Barlow house for 6 years. Her voice grew stronger. I cooked. I washed clothing. I cleaned floors. I cared for Ruth when her hands swelled so badly she could not hold a spoon. I sat beside Everett when he had influenza, because everyone else was afraid of catching it. I repaired Lydia's blue dress the night before the harvest dance because she tore the waist. Lydia looked down. I did all of that because I believed they were my family. Miriam swallowed. When Thomas died, I thought I would grieve with them. Her voice cracked. Instead, 18 days after we buried him, they told me I was another mouth to feed. Ruth's eyes filled. Miriam, no. It was the first time Miriam had ever interrupted her. Ruth stopped. You had your turn. The words were not loud. That made them stronger. Miriam looked at Everett. You told me Thomas left nothing. He had debts. Naomi? Naomi stepped forward. Everett's face changed. Naomi held up the will. I witnessed Thomas Barlow's will. Murmurs spread through the room. Everett laughed. You were mistaken. No. Naomi's voice shook. I checked the county filing myself. She looked toward several people. There was no later will. Everett's expression hardened. That proves nothing. A man near the wall raised his hand. I might have something. Everyone turned. It was the clerk from the Bracken Hollow trading post. My name's Silas Reed. He looked uncomfortable. Everett came through here twice last month. Miriam stared. Silas continued. He asked me whether Mrs. Barlow looked happy when she came to town with Daniel. Everett's face went pale. That isn't unusual. Silas shook his head. You also offered me $5 to tell people she'd been asking about Daniel's money. A shock moved through the room. Daniel took one step forward. Miriam caught his hand. He stopped. Everett looked around wildly. Lies, another voice spoke. No. Mrs. Pierce stood near the coffee table. The same woman who had confronted Miriam in the mercantile. Her face was ashamed. Everett told me Miriam forced the family to send her here. Miriam looked at her. Mrs. Pierce continued. I repeated it. She swallowed. I shouldn't have. Everett's jaw tightened. Everyone is suddenly brave. Naomi stepped forward. There's more. She held another document. Thomas's timber certificates were transferred 11 days after his death. Everett's face changed completely. Miriam saw it. Everyone did. Naomi continued. The signature transferring Miriam's interest appears to be hers. Miriam stared. I never signed anything. Naomi nodded. I know. The sheriff, who had been standing near the back, moved closer. Everett stepped backward. Ruth whispered, Everett? He looked at his mother. For the first time, Miriam realized Ruth truly had not known everything. Perhaps she had known about the money. Perhaps not. But the signature frightened her. Everett, Ruth repeated. What did you do? Everett's mouth opened. Nothing came. Miriam looked at him. She expected satisfaction. She expected revenge to feel warm. It did not. It felt sad. She saw the man she had once cared for when he was sick, the brother of the husband she had loved, a person who had convinced himself Miriam was easy to steal from because nobody would believe she deserved anything. The sheriff spoke quietly. Everett, I think you should come outside with me. Ruth began crying. Lydia covered her mouth. Everett looked at Miriam. You did this. Miriam shook her head. No, you couldn't leave things alone. You took what Thomas left me. You had a roof. Your roof. You had food. That I cooked. People were watching. Everett pointed toward Daniel. And now you have him. The insult arrived. Miriam knew what he meant before he said it. His voice rose. Do you honestly think a man like Daniel Arlen wants you? Daniel moved. Miriam held tighter to his hand. Everett laughed cruelly. Look at yourself, Miriam. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She did. For once, she actually did. She looked down at the blue dress, at her broad body beneath it, at the hands that had worked for years, at the soft stomach she had spent a lifetime trying to hide, at the heavy arms that had carried laundry, firewood, sick relatives, groceries, and grief. Then Miriam looked back at Everett. I have. Her voice was calm. I finally have. The room became completely silent. And I don't hate what I see anymore. Everett stared. Miriam wiped her tears. That is the part you cannot stand. She looked at Ruth. At first I thought you sent me into those mountains because you wanted me punished. Ruth lowered her eyes. Maybe you did. Miriam looked at Lydia. Maybe you thought I would come crawling back and accept whatever scraps you gave me. Then she looked at Everett. But I found a room where nobody laughed when I ate. Daniel's face changed. I found work that was paid. Her voice shook. I found a table where my body was not a joke. Several women in the room began crying quietly, and I found someone who looked at me without asking me to become smaller first. Miriam looked at Daniel. He stared back at her. No shame, no hesitation, nothing hidden. Miriam turned to Everett again. You were right about one thing. He remained silent. I was desperate for affection. Her voice cracked. I spent years begging your family for it. Ruth began sobbing. Miriam continued. I'm not begging anymore. The sheriff led Everett outside. Nobody stopped him. The legal matter took several weeks. Miriam recovered most of what Thomas had left her. Not all of it. Some money had already been spent. The timber certificates were restored. Everett avoided jail after agreeing to repay what he had taken and surrender his interest in the disputed property, though the disgrace followed him more effectively than any punishment Miriam could have created. Ruth sent letters. Miriam read the first. Then she placed the others unopened inside a drawer. Lydia wrote once. Her apology was short. I thought laughing with them would keep them from laughing at me. I know that does not excuse it. Miriam read that sentence many times. Eventually she wrote back, I hope you learn there are kinder ways to feel safe. Nothing more. Winter settled fully over Alder Ridge. The world became white and quiet. Miriam had money now. She could leave. Daniel knew that. Perhaps that was why he became restless. One evening he stood beside the stove, while Miriam rolled dough. You could buy a house in town. She stopped. I could. You could open a bakery, I suppose. You wouldn't have to work here. Miriam looked at him. Are you dismissing me? Daniel's eyes widened. No. You sound like it. I'm saying you have choices now. Miriam slowly dusted flour from her hands. Do you want me to go? No. The answer came too quickly. Miriam stared. Daniel looked annoyed with himself. No, he repeated more quietly. Then why are we discussing this? Because I don't want you staying because you think you owe me. Miriam leaned against the table. I don't owe you. I know. Do you? Daniel looked at her. Miriam's heart began beating faster. You gave me work, she said. I gave you work in return. Yes. You gave me a room. You kept the house standing. You treated me with respect. That isn't a debt. I know. Daniel became quiet. Miriam smiled slightly. I think you are trying to ask me something without asking. I'm terrible at this. I noticed. Daniel exhaled. Then he walked toward her. Miriam did not move. He stopped an arm's length away. I don't want a housekeeper. Miriam raised an eyebrow. That is unfortunate. I just made enough bread for a week. I want you here. I am here. Miriam. She smiled. Daniel looked more nervous than she had ever seen him. That softened something inside her. He reached for her hands. This time he did not hesitate. I spent 4 years keeping a room locked because I thought loving Elise meant I had to stay miserable. Miriam squeezed his fingers. It doesn't. I know that now. Snow tapped softly against the window. Daniel continued. And then Everett sent you up this mountain thinking he was throwing away someone inconvenient. Miriam's eyes filled. Daniel's thumbs moved slowly over her hands. He sent me the strongest person I have ever known. Miriam laughed through the tears. Don't exaggerate. I'm not. You dragged a fallen pine tree off the road last month. That was easier than what you did in that church. Miriam looked down. Daniel gently lifted her chin. I don't want you because I'm lonely. She stopped breathing. I don't want you because I pity you. His voice lowered. And I don't want you because there's nobody else. Miriam's tears fell freely. Daniel smiled faintly. I want you because when you walk into this room, it feels like somebody opened a window. She laughed. That makes no sense. It does to me. He moved closer. I want your bread burning because you forgot it while arguing with me. I burned one loaf. 3, 2, 3. Miriam smiled. Daniel continued. I want you singing badly while you wash dishes. I do not sing badly. The dog leaves. We don't have a dog. The fox leaves. Miriam laughed harder. Daniel's face softened. I want your sewing beside the fire. Your hair pins on the washstand. Your terrible habit of moving my tools because you think you're organizing them. They need organizing. I want all of it. Miriam's laughter disappeared. Daniel looked directly into her eyes. I want you. For most of Miriam's life, those words had belonged to other women. Thinner women. Graceful women. Women who entered rooms without wondering whether chairs would be wide enough. Women who had never heard relatives calculate how much fabric their dresses required. Miriam looked at Daniel. Say it again. His expression softened. I want you. Not the house. You. Not someone to cook. You. Not someone to make this place less lonely. Daniel stepped closer until his chest almost touched hers. Miriam Barlow. She smiled through tears. Yes? I want you so much that I have spent the last month terrified you will realize you have money now and leave. Miriam stared. You were afraid? Yes? You? Yes. She laughed. Daniel groaned. Please don't enjoy this. I'm enjoying it. I can tell. Miriam placed her hands against his chest. His heart was beating quickly. That amazed her. This man who frightened half the valley was nervous because of her. Daniel? Yes? You can kiss me now. He froze. Miriam smiled. That was not a difficult instruction. I want to be certain. I am. Daniel lowered his head. The kiss was gentle, almost careful. Miriam had expected something dramatic. Instead, it felt quiet, warm, real. When they separated, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. Miriam closed her eyes. She did not feel transformed. She did not suddenly become thinner, younger, prettier, or untouched by everything that had happened. She was still Miriam, soft-bodied, broad-hipped, heavy-armed, round-faced, a widow who had cried in a wagon because she thought nobody wanted her. That woman had not disappeared. Miriam no longer wanted her to. Spring came slowly to Alder Ridge. The snow withdrew from the valley. Green appeared beneath it. Miriam invested part of Thomas's inheritance in a small baking business with Naomi Reeve. Twice a week, Daniel carried baskets into Bracken Hollow. People began ordering Miriam's bread before she could make enough of it. The same women who once whispered about her now stood in line for cinnamon rolls on Saturday mornings. Miriam noticed the irony. She did not need to mention it. Ruth Barlow eventually visited. Miriam saw her wagon from the porch. For a moment, the old fear returned. Daniel stepped outside. Miriam touched his arm. I'll speak to her, he nodded. Ruth climbed the porch steps slowly. She looked older. Miriam. Ruth! Her former mother-in-law stared at her. Not at the house. Not at Daniel. At Miriam. I owe you an apology. Yes? Ruth blinked. Miriam almost smiled. The old Miriam would have said, You don't. The new Miriam knew better. Ruth swallowed. I was cruel. Yes. I was angry after Thomas died. So was I. I was afraid Everett wouldn't manage the property. I understand fear. Ruth's eyes filled. I should have protected you. Miriam looked out toward the mountains. You should have treated me like family. Ruth began crying. Miriam felt compassion, but compassion was not surrender. I don't know whether I can forgive everything yet. Ruth nodded. I understand. No. Miriam looked at her. I don't think you do. Ruth became still. For years, every time you laughed at my body, I carried that laugh into the next room. Her voice remained calm. I heard you when I dressed, when I ate, when Thomas touched me, when I walked into town. Even after I left your house, I still heard you." Ruth lowered her face. "Miriam, but it's becoming quieter." Ruth looked up. Miriam smiled sadly. "That is enough for me right now." Ruth nodded. She did not ask to come inside. Miriam appreciated that. Before leaving, Ruth looked at Daniel, then back at Miriam. "Are you happy?" Miriam thought about the question. "Yes." The answer surprised them both. Ruth smiled faintly. "I'm glad." Miriam believed her. That did not erase the past. It simply allowed the future to exist beside it. After Ruth's wagon disappeared, Daniel joined Miriam on the porch. "You all right?" "Yes." "You sure?" "No." Daniel smiled. "That sounds more like you." Miriam leaned against him. Months later, they stood together at Bracken Chapel. There was no great crowd, no grand celebration. Naomi attended. Mr. Clegg came down from the northern road. Silas Reed brought flowers. Several people from town filled the benches. Miriam wore a simple cream dress. She had made it herself. The dress did not hide her arms. It did not squeeze her waist. It did not apologize for her body. Daniel stood beside her. When the minister asked whether Miriam chose this man freely, something caught in her throat. Choose. That word mattered. The Barlows had chosen where she worked. Chosen what she deserved. Chosen how much money she needed. Chosen what kind of woman she was. For years, Miriam thought survival meant accepting whatever other people selected for her. Now the entire valley waited. Daniel looked at her. He was not afraid she might say no. He simply waited. Miriam smiled. "I do." Daniel's eyes filled. Later, outside the church, Miriam stood beneath a bright spring sky. People laughed around her. Children ran between wagons. Naomi hugged her. Mr. Clegg handed Daniel a bottle of terrible homemade whiskey. Miriam looked toward the mountains. Somewhere beyond those peaks stood the dark house she had once approached, believing it might become her prison. Now herbs grew beside the porch. Curtains moved in open windows. Daniel had turned Elise's old room into a reading room after carefully packing away the things he wished to keep. He had not forgotten his first wife. Miriam had never asked him to. Love did not require destroying whatever came before. It only asked for room beside it. Daniel approached, carrying 2 plates of cake. He handed Miriam the larger piece. She looked at it, then at him. "You did that deliberately." "What? Mine is larger. You like cake?" Miriam glanced toward a group of women standing nearby. Years earlier, she would have exchanged the plates. She would have taken the smaller slice. She would have eaten slowly while wondering who was watching. Instead, Miriam took a bite. Daniel smiled. "What?" "Nothing. You're staring. I'm allowed." Miriam shook her head. She took another bite. Across the churchyard, Lydia Barlow stood beside Ruth. They had come quietly. Miriam had invited them. Everett had not come. Miriam had not invited him. Perhaps one day that would change. Perhaps it would not. Forgiveness, Miriam had learned, was not a door other people could demand she open. It belonged to her too. Lydia met Miriam's eyes. For a second, shame passed across her face. Then she smiled. Not mockingly. Simply smiled. Miriam returned it. Daniel touched her back. "Ready to go home?" Miriam looked toward the mountains. Home. The word no longer meant the place where Thomas had lived. It no longer meant the Barlow kitchen. It did not even mean Daniel's house. Home had become something larger, a table where she could eat without apology, a bedroom where she could close the door, a kitchen where her labor belonged partly to herself. A man who did not defend her because he believed she was weak, but stood beside her because he respected her strength. Friends who knew the truth. Work that carried her own name. A body she was slowly learning to inhabit without shame. A life she had chosen. Miriam took Daniel's hand. Yes. They walked toward the wagon. People watched them. Miriam knew some would always talk. There would always be someone eager to whisper that Daniel Arlen could have found a thinner wife. Someone might always remember she arrived in the mountains with one trunk. swollen eyes, and almost nothing to her name. That no longer frightened her. Let them remember. Let them tell the story accurately. Miriam Barlow had been sent into the mountains because people believed she was disposable. She had arrived believing every insult they had ever given her. She had entered Daniel Arlen's house, expecting danger, and discovered respect. She had found mystery, grief, fear, and secrets there too, but none of them had frightened her as deeply as the belief that she was unworthy of being loved. That had been the darkest room of all, and unlike Daniel's locked room, nobody else could open it for her. Daniel helped. Naomi helped. Truth helped, but in the end, Miriam had been the one who finally turned the key. She climbed onto the wagon beside her husband. Daniel gathered the reins. Miriam looked back once at the church. Then she remembered another wagon, a colder memory, one trunk behind her, Mr. Clegg beside her. Tears slipping down her cheeks while the Barlow house disappeared in the distance. She wished she could reach backward through time and sit beside that frightened woman. She would not tell her not to cry. She would not tell her everything happened for a reason. Some things were simply cruel. Thomas dying was cruel. Being betrayed was cruel. Having her money stolen was cruel. Being mocked for the body she lived in was cruel. Miriam would never pretend suffering had been necessary just because happiness came afterward. She would only take that crying widow's hand and tell her one thing: keep going. Not because a man waits at the end of the road. Not because revenge waits. Not because the people who hurt you will someday regret it. Keep going, because the life they have described for you is not the only life available. The wagon rolled forward. Daniel glanced at her. You're crying. Miriam touched her cheek. She laughed. So I am. Happy? She thought about it. Mostly. There are different kinds of tears. Daniel nodded solemnly. I've recently been educated on the subject. Miriam laughed. The sound traveled into the trees. Daniel smiled, and far above Bracken Hollow, where people had once believed only grief lived, the mountain carried that laughter home.